Millionaire CEO takes a cab and is shocked to find his driver is the black single mother he. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. Carlos Rivera stood in his big office on the 50th floor of Rivera Industries. He looked out at the bright lights of New York City. His fancy suit felt tight, so he pulled on his tie to loosen it. It was another late night at work. The meeting with the board had taken longer than he thought, and now it was almost midnight. He picked up his phone to call his driver, but then he remembered George was off this week for his daughter's wedding. Carlos sighed and checked his watch. He needed to get home and prepare for a big meeting tomorrow. "Guess I'll have to take a cab," he said to himself. He grabbed his briefcase and walked out of his office. The security guard at the front desk gave him a nod. "Working late again, Mr. Rivera?" Carlos smiled. "You know how it is, Joe. The work never stops." Outside, the air was cool. Carlos pulled his coat tighter around him and stepped to the curb. He raised his hand, and a yellow taxi pulled up. He opened the door and got inside. "75th and Park, please," he said. "Sure thing," the driver answered. Carlos froze. That voice, it sounded familiar. He leaned forward and looked at the driver's ID on the dashboard. Angela Washington. His heart stopped. It had been 25 years, but it felt like no time had passed. Suddenly, he was back in college, sitting next to the prettiest girl he had ever met. Angela had been smart, kind, and full of life. She had helped him with his studies, and he had fallen in love with her. "Angela?" His voice was soft. The cab moved a little to the side before straightening. In the rearview mirror, he saw her eyes widen. "Carlos Rivera?" "Well, I'll be," she said. Surprised. She still looked beautiful. Her hair was shorter now, neatly braided. She had a few lines around her eyes, but her smile was just the same. "I can't believe it's you," Carlos said. "How long has it been?" 25 years, give or take," Angela replied. "Last time I saw you was at graduation." The memories flooded back, their secret love story, the late-night study sessions, their dreams for the future, and then the painful goodbye when real life got in the way. "Angela, I've thought about you so many times over the years. What happened to you? Last I heard, you were going to law school." Angela laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. Life had other plans. "I got pregnant my first year. My son came first, so I had to leave school. Been driving cabs ever since. It pays the bills." Carlos felt like someone had punched him. "You have a son?" "He's 24 now. Just finished his master's in engineering," Angela said proudly. "Raised him by myself, but we managed." The cab stopped at a red light. Angela turned to look at him properly. "And you? CEO of Rivera Industries? I see your name in the news all the time." "Yeah," Carlos said. "Married, divorced, no kids." He didn't tell her that his marriage had been more of a business deal than love. Angela smiled. "Still working too hard, I see. Some things never change." Carlos grinned. "Do you remember Tony's Pizza on 116th Street? "Of course. Best pizza in the city. You always got pepperoni and mushroom." They said it together, then laughed. The cab pulled up in front of Carlos's building, but he didn't want to leave. "Angela, would you like to get coffee sometime? Just to catch up?" Angela hesitated. He saw her thinking. "I don't know, Carlos. That was a long time ago. We're different now." "Please," he said, "just as friends." She pulled out a small notepad and wrote her number. "Here, but think about this first. We ended things for a reason. Your family, my background, those problems didn't go away. If anything, they're bigger now." Carlos took the paper. Their hands brushed, and he felt the same spark as before. "I don't care about any of that anymore, Angela." She gave him a small smile. "We'll see. Call me if you still want that coffee." Carlos watched as the cab drove away. He looked at the note in his hand, remembering all their old love notes. Up in his penthouse, he walked past his fancy furniture without even seeing it. His mind was stuck in the past. He remembered their last conversation, his father's threats, Angela's pride, and their heartbreaking goodbye. He saved her number in his phone. Angela sat at a red light, gripping the steering wheel. Of all the people in New York, it had to be Carlos Rivera who got into her cab. She thought about her small apartment, the unpaid bills, her son's student loans. Carlos lived in a world of money and power. But when he spoke, she felt 19 again. The light turned green. She pushed thoughts of Carlos away. Rent was due soon. She couldn't afford to get lost in old memories. But she couldn't help wondering, would he really call? Carlos barely slept that night. He kept looking at Angela's number, thinking about her. When his alarm rang at 6 a.m., he had hardly closed his eyes. His sister Renata called. "Are you ready for the board meeting?" "Dad's coming." Carlos froze. "Dad? He hasn't come to a meeting in years." "Well, it's a big deal," Renata said. "And you know how he is about the Whitmore family. Just don't let him take over. You're the CEO now." After hanging up, Carlos looked at Angela's number again. Before he could stop himself, he pressed call. "Hello." Her voice was sleepy. "Angela, I'm sorry. Did I wake you?" "Carlos? It's 6 in the morning." "I know. I couldn't wait. Will you have coffee with me today?" After my meeting, there was a pause. "You don't waste time, do you?" He could hear the smile in her voice. "I have to pick up my son at 4, but I can meet you at 2. "That's perfect," Carlos said. "Not at some fancy cafe, though. Let's go to the diner on 82nd Street. Carlos felt embarrassed. Of course, the diner is perfect. After hanging up, he looked at himself in the mirror. What was he doing? He had the biggest meeting of his career in a few hours, but all he could think about was Angela. The board meeting started at 9. Carlos stood at the head of the table, presenting his plan. His father sat across from him, watching closely. "What about the Asian market?" his father interrupted. "I was getting to that, Dad," Carlos said, trying to stay calm. When the meeting ended, Eduardo Whitmore, the other company's CEO, smiled. "Very impressive. This merger will be good for both of us." Catalina Whitmore, his daughter, touched Carlos's arm. "Let's celebrate with dinner tonight." "I can't," Carlos said. "I have plans." His father frowned. "What could be more important than this deal?" "It's personal, Dad." Back in his office, Carlos changed into casual clothes. At 1:30, he headed to the diner, nervous. It felt like a first date. When he arrived, Angela was already there, sitting by the window. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater. Her hair was in neat braids. She looked more beautiful than any fancy women Carlos usually spent time with. "You came," she said as he sat down. "Of course I came." Carlos wanted to hold her hand, but he stopped himself. "You look wonderful. And you look tired. Rough day?" "My father showed up. He always makes me feel like I'm still 16 years old and that I'm disappointing him." Angela nodded. "Some things never change. Remember when he caught us at that party in high school?" "How could I forget? He gave me a long lecture about being responsible and choosing the right people to be with. It lasted 3 hours." The waitress came, and they ordered coffee. Angela put cream in hers, just like she used to in college. "Tell me about your son," Carlos said. Angela's face lit up. "Mateo is amazing. He works so hard in school. He got a full scholarship to MIT, just like I got one to Columbia. He was in California for his master's degree, but he got a job in New York. That's why he's coming home today." "You raised him all by yourself?" "Yes. His father left when he found out I was pregnant." She shrugged. "But we managed. I worked 2 jobs when Mateo was little. The cab company lets me choose my own hours, so that helped when he was in school." Carlos felt admiration and regret. While he was building his business and living in luxury, Angela had been raising a child alone and working hard. "I should have looked for you after graduation," he said softly. "I've regretted letting you go every day since then." Angela's eyes softened. Carlos's phone buzzed. A message from his father. "Emergency board meeting at 4 p.m. The Whitmore family is raising concerns." "Damn it," he muttered. "Work calling?" "Yes, I'm sorry, I have to go." He hesitated. "Angela, have dinner with me tomorrow night, please." She bit her lip. "I don't know. Mateo just got home." "Bring him. I'd love to meet him. You want to have dinner with a cab driver and her son? What would your father say? Carlos reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was warm. I don't care what my father says. Not anymore. I lost you once because I cared too much about what people thought. I won't make that mistake again. Angela looked at their hands. Okay, she said. Dinner tomorrow, but not at one of your fancy restaurants. I know just the place. Do you remember Bella Luna, the little Italian restaurant where we had our first date? It's still there? Still there. 7. She squeezed his hand. 7. As Carlos hurried back to work, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Catalina Whitmore. Carlos, we need to talk. This merger is important for both our families. Maybe we should make it even more permanent. He ignored the message. Let his father and the Whitmores worry about their merger. For the first time in 25 years, Carlos felt truly happy. That afternoon, Angela had picked up a passenger heading to the airport. As she drove, she thought about Carlos. She thought about the way he looked at her at the diner. She thought about their plans for tomorrow night. You're crazy, she told herself in the mirror. He lives in a different world. But her heart didn't listen. It just remembered how right it felt when he held her hand. Angela waited at the airport, looking at her watch. Mateo's flight had landed 20 minutes ago. She smoothed down her shirt, wishing she had time to change after work. Finally, she saw him in the crowd. Mateo was tall now, but his smile was the same. Mom, he hugged her. You look tired. Are you working too hard again? Look who's talking, Mr. Master's degree. She touched his face. You've lost weight. Have you been eating? Graduate school diet, Mom. Ramen noodles and coffee. As they walked to her cab, Mateo told her about his new job in Manhattan. The salary is amazing. First thing I'm doing is paying off those student loans. You'll do no such thing. Those are my loans. Our loans, he corrected. And I'm paying them. Also, you're retiring from the cab company. No arguments. Angela smiled. Actually, something happened today. I ran into someone from my past. Oh? Mateo put his bags in the trunk. Who? Carlos Rivera. Mateo froze. The CEO of Rivera Industries? That Carlos Rivera? Yes, Angela said. We dated in college. Wait, what? You dated a billionaire? He wasn't a billionaire then, just a boy I tutored in statistics. And now? He wants us to have dinner with him tomorrow night. Us? Mom, what's going on? Nothing, it's just dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date. Mateo frowned. You remember where you had your first date? Angela's phone buzzed. A message from Carlos. Looking forward to tomorrow night. Been thinking about you all day. Mateo saw her smile. Mom, be careful. Rich guys like that don't usually have good intentions with women like us. Women like us? You know, working class, black. Angela's smile faded. Carlos isn't like that. Then why didn't it work out before? She didn't answer. How could she explain the pressure from Carlos's family? The whispers, the stares, her own pride. Meanwhile, across town, Carlos was in a board meeting. Catalina Whitmore was talking about the merger. Furthermore, she said, looking at Carlos, we believe a more personal union between our families would strengthen this deal. Carlos knew what they wanted, a marriage of convenience. The terms are fair as they are, he said firmly. We don't need to add personal matters. His father cut in. Don't be hasty. Catalina's idea makes sense. No, Dad. The room went silent. Carlos never said no to his father. After the meeting, Richard Rivera followed Carlos. What's wrong with you? This deal is everything we worked for. Maybe I want more. More? You're a Fortune 500 CEO. What else could you want? Carlos thought about Angela's smile. Something real. His father's face darkened. Angela Washington, that scholarship girl? The one I told you to leave? The one I loved, Carlos said. The one you threatened. I did what was best for you. No, you did what was best for the company. Carlos walked to the door. I have dinner plans. Cancel them. We're dining with the Whitmores. No, Dad, I'm having dinner with Angela and her son. At home, Angela and Mateo talked. Mom, he's still in love with you, Mateo said. Angela's phone buzzed. A text from Carlos. I found something today that made me think of you. A first edition of Pride and Prejudice. Remember how you used to read it between classes? Angela smiled, tears in her eyes. Mom, just promise me you'll be careful. I will, she said. She gave Carlos a big hug. When did you get so smart? She asked. He smiled and said, I had a good teacher. Later that night, Angela lay in bed and couldn't sleep. Tomorrow, she was going to have dinner with Carlos Rivera, the boy she once loved, who was now a powerful man. She had given him up to protect him, but now he seemed ready to risk everything to be with her again. You're not 19 anymore, she told herself. You can't just fall back in love like nothing has changed. But as she drifted to sleep, she wondered if her heart had ever really stopped loving him. The next evening, Angela stood in front of her mirror, trying on her third outfit. Mateo, her son, sat on her bed watching her. Mom, you look fine. It's just dinner. Angela smoothed down her simple black dress she had bought last year. Maybe I should wear pants instead, she said. Mateo looked at her and said, the dress is perfect. Let's go or we'll be late. They took the subway to the village, and Angela refused to let Carlos send a car for them. As they walked the familiar streets to the restaurant, Bella Luna, Angela's stomach was full of butterflies. Carlos was already there, standing outside the restaurant. He had changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a blue sweater, looking like the college boy she remembered. Angela, Carlos said, smiling when he saw her. Then he turned to Mateo and extended his hand. You must be Mateo, he said. I'm Carlos. Mateo shook his hand firmly and said, Sir. Inside the restaurant, everything looked just like it used to. The red checkered tablecloths, the Italian music, and even some of the same waiters. Mario's still here, Carlos said, nodding to the waiter who had served them on their first date. I made sure we got his section. Mario saw them and smiled. Madonna Santa, Angela, and Carlos after all these years. He hugged them both. And who is this handsome young man? He asked. This is my son, Mateo, Angela said proudly. Your son? Mamma mia, I feel old, Mario said. They followed Mario to their table in the corner. As they walked, Angela noticed Mateo was watching everything closely. He looked like he was trying to figure out what Carlos was up to. So, Carlos, Mateo said, Mom tells me you just finished your master's at MIT. That's impressive. Mom worked 3 jobs to get me through school, Mateo added. Carlos looked at him with a soft smile. Your mom was always the hardest worker I knew. She used to tutor half our class while holding down 2 jobs and keeping a 4.0 GPA. You remember my GPA? Angela asked, surprised. I remember everything about you, Angela, Carlos said, his eyes locked on hers, making her heart skip. Then Mateo asked, What exactly are your intentions with my mother? Angela gasped, but Carlos held up his hand. It's a fair question, he said. Then he looked at Mateo and said, 25 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life, letting your mom go. I've regretted it every day since. My intention now is to make up for lost time, if she'll let me. Before anyone could speak more, there was a loud noise from the front of the restaurant. Catalina Whitmore, a woman who clearly didn't like Angela, stood there sneering. So this is why you've been acting so strange, she said, walking over to their table, running around with some cab driver. Carlos stood up. Catalina, you need to leave. What about the merger? She asked. The merger is just a business deal, Carlos said firmly. My personal life is not up for discussion. Catalina laughed cruelly. Personal life? Please. She's just after your money. Look at her. Look at this place. Mateo started to stand, but Angela grabbed his arm. She's not worth it, baby, she said. Catalina smirked and added, You're not worth it either, honey. Not for someone like Carlos. She turned to Carlos and said, When you're done slumming it, call me. You know where to find me. After she left, the restaurant went quiet. Mario came over with a bottle of wine. On the house, he said. Some people never learn. Class doesn't come from expensive clothes. Carlos sat back down, his face red with anger. Angela, Matteo, I am so sorry. Is that what your world is like? Matteo asked quietly. Some of them are like that, Carlos said. But I don't care about that world anymore. Carlos looked at Angela. I care about this, about us. Angela looked at their joined hands. Maybe Catalina's right, she said softly. Our worlds are too different. No, Carlos said firmly. Don't let her get in the way. Don't let anyone come between us again. Matteo watched them carefully. Finally, he spoke. Mom always said you were different from other rich guys, that you saw people for who they were, not what they had. Your mom sees the best in everyone, Carlos said, smiling. It's one of the things I love about her. The word love hung in the air. Angela felt her eyes fill with tears. I thought I was protecting you back then, she whispered, from losing everything. You were everything. Carlos squeezed her hand. I was just too young and stupid to fight for what mattered. As they ate, Carlos told funny stories about Angela from college, making Matteo laugh. Angela talked about Matteo's childhood science experiments that nearly blew up their kitchen. By dessert, even Matteo had relaxed when Carlos mentioned that his company was looking for engineering talent for a new project. Matteo's eyes lit up. Actually, Carlos said, we're launching a green energy project next month. We could use someone with fresh ideas. Matteo looked at Carlos. I'd like that chance if Mom's okay with it. Angela looked between them. She saw her brilliant son and the man she'd never stopped loving, both looking at her with hope in their eyes. We'll talk about it, she said finally. After dinner, they walked through the village. The streets were busy with people, but Angela felt like they were in their own world. Matteo walked ahead to give them some privacy. I meant what I said in there, Carlos told her softly. I want to make up for lost time. Carlos, your life is so complicated, Angela said. The merger, your family, people like Catalina, it's too much. None of that matters, Carlos said, turning to face her. What matters is how I feel when I'm with you. Like no time has passed, like I'm finally where I belong. A street musician played a love song nearby, one they used to dance to in college. Carlos held out his hand. Dance with me, he said. Here, on the street. Why not? We're already causing a scene. Angela laughed and took his hand. They swayed together to the music, and she rested her head on his shoulder. He still smelled the same, that mix of cologne and something uniquely Carlos. I've missed you, she whispered. I've missed you too, he whispered back. Suddenly, Matteo's voice broke the moment. Mom, it's getting late. You have an early shift tomorrow. They pulled apart, but Carlos still held her hand. Let me drive you home, he said. We'll take the subway, she replied firmly. But call me tomorrow. Try and stop me, Carlos said with a grin. As they walked to the subway station, Angela could feel Matteo watching them. You're still in love with him, aren't you? Matteo asked. It wasn't a question, he said. Maybe I am, Angela answered, linking her arm with his. Is that crazy? Probably, Matteo said with a smile. But maybe crazy is exactly what you need. Back at their apartment, Angela found a package waiting at their door. Inside was a first edition of Pride and Prejudice with a note in Carlos's handwriting, some love stories are worth waiting for. She hugged the book to her chest, remembering their kiss. Tomorrow, there would be problems to face. His world, her world, all the obstacles that had torn them apart before. But tonight, she just let herself feel happy. The next morning, the headlines hit. Rivera Industries CEO in secret romance with cab driver. Pictures of Carlos and Angela kissing on the street were everywhere. Carlos's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His sister Renata called first. Have you lost your mind? She asked. Dad is freaking out. The Whitmores are threatening to pull out of the merger. Carlos replied, I was thinking that for once in my life, I want to be happy. Renata said, this is bigger than your happiness. It's about our family's legacy. Carlos didn't care. He called Angela, but it went straight to voicemail. Across town, Angela was staring at her phone. There were 27 missed calls, mostly from reporters. Her boss at the cab company had called to tell her to take a few days off. Matteo came out of his room holding his laptop. "Mom, you need to see this," he said. The online comments were mean and cruel. "I can't do this to him," Angela whispered. "His whole life is falling apart because of me." "No," Matteo said firmly. "His life is falling apart because people are racist and classist. Don't blame yourself." Angela's phone buzzed again. It was Carlos. "Please pick up. We need to talk." Angela texted back, "I need some time. Please understand." At Rivera Industries, the board had an emergency meeting. "The stock is dropping," one director said. "We need to fix this." Catalina Whitmore stood up and said, "Our family will overlook this if the merger goes through with the extra terms we discussed." She meant marriage, a business arrangement disguised as romance to save the company's reputation. Carlos stood up. "I won't deny Angela, and I won't marry someone else just to make you all happy." His father yelled, "Carlos, you're not a lovesick teenager anymore. You're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. Act like it." "Maybe I don't want to be CEO anymore," Carlos said, and the room went silent. "What did you say?" his father shouted. "I choose her over this company," Carlos said. "I've loved her for 25 years. At his office, Carlos found his mother waiting. She pulled out a bottle of scotch. "See, you look like you could use a drink," she said. "Tell me about Angela." And Carlos did. He told his mom about the brilliant scholarship student who had tutored him, the study dates that turned into real dates, and how Angela had made him want to be better. "She never cared about our money. She cared about me," he said. Eleanor smiled softly. "I know what it's like," she said. "I was a secretary when I met your father. Our family hated me, but he married me anyway. Seth, sometimes I wonder if that's why he pushes so hard now, to prove we deserve to be in their world." Carlos said, "I don't care about their world anymore, Mom. I'm going to find her. I'm going to fight for her." Meanwhile, Angela was cleaning out her locker at the cab company. Her coworkers watched her with sympathy and curiosity. "You should have told us you were dating Carlos Rivera. We've been picking him up from that building for years," Angela replied. "I wasn't dating him. I mean, I am now, but," she sighed. "Life's always complicated." Rocio said, "Life might be complicated, but love is simple." Angela carried a box to the subway. Just then, a black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, and Catalina Whitmore said, "Get in. We need to talk." Angela shook her head. "I don't think we have anything to say to each other." Catalina didn't listen. She offered Angela $5 million to leave Carlos. $10 million if you leave the city completely. Think about your son's future. This is more money than you could make in 10 lifetimes driving a cab, Catalina said. Angela looked at the check and then at Catalina's face. "You don't get it. I never wanted Carlos's money, not 25 years ago and not now," Catalina said. "Everyone wants money. Name your price." Angela replied, "My price is respect, dignity, and love, things you clearly don't understand. Keep your money. I'm not for sale." Angela walked away, shaking a little as she used her Metro card. When she got home, Matteo, her son, was on the phone. He was excited. "Yes, I understand. Thank you for the opportunity," he said, smiling. He hung up and grinned. "That was Rivera Industries. They want me to come for an interview tomorrow." Angela's heart dropped. "Baby, no, not after everything that's happened." Matteo said, "Mom, this has nothing to do with Carlos. They looked at my resume, my grades. It's about my skills. The timing's bad, but I'm not letting other people's prejudice stop me from pursuing my dreams. You taught me that." Angela's phone buzzed. It was a text from Carlos. "I don't care what anyone says. I love you. Please let me see you." Matteo read the message and said, "You know, for a smart woman, you're being kind of stupid. The man is risking everything for you. He just declared his love for you in front of the whole city, and you're hiding in our apartment." "I'm protecting him," Angela said. "No, you're doing the same thing you did 25 years ago, letting other people decide what's best for him," Matteo said. He grabbed her phone and typed a response. He sent it and said, "It's time to stop running, Mom." 30 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Angela opened it and saw Carlos standing there, looking tired but determined. "I should have fought for us back then," he said. "I'm fighting now. Please don't push me away again." Angela felt tears in her eyes. "Your whole life is falling apart because of me." "No," Carlos said, stepping forward and gently holding her face. "My life is finally coming together because of you." Mateo quietly left the room, giving them space. Angela said, "I saw Catalina today. She offered me money to leave town." Carlos's jaw tightened. "How much?" $10 million, Angela said. "That's all?" Carlos tried to smile. "I'm a little insulted on your behalf." Angela said, "This isn't funny. Your company's stock is falling. The merger is falling apart." Carlos said, "I don't care about the merger." Angela looked at him, surprised. "You should care. This is your life's work." "No," Carlos said, taking her hands in his. "The company is my father's life's work. 25 years ago, I let him convince me it was mine too, that nothing else mattered." He touched her cheek. "I was wrong." Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Angela opened it to find Carlos's mother, Elena Rivera, standing there. "What are you doing here?" Carlos asked, surprised. "I had my driver track you down," Elena said, walking in. "Hello, Angela. It's been a long time." Angela nervously greeted her. "Would you like some coffee?" "That would be lovely," Elena said. As Angela made coffee, she remembered Elena from college. She was always perfectly poised and careful about her son's relationships. "Sorry about the mismatched cups," Angela said, handing her coffee. "I don't usually entertain billionaires." "You always did have a sharp wit," Elena said with a smile. "It's one of the things I liked about you." Carlos and Angela exchanged surprised looks. Elena continued, "I wasn't against you back then, but I knew my husband would never accept it." Elena sipped her coffee. "He still won't. He's at the club right now plotting with the Whitmores." Carlos said, "Let him plot." Elena replied, "It's not that simple. The Whitmores don't just want out of the merger. They want control of the company. They're calling an emergency shareholder meeting." Elena continued, "They'll try to force you out as CEO." Angela said, "They can't do that, can they?" "With enough support from other shareholders, yes," Elena replied. "Your father is furious enough to help them." Mateo walked into the room and said, "Mr. Rivera, your office confirmed my interview for tomorrow morning." Elena turned to him. "You must be Mateo. I'm Carlos's mother." Mateo nodded. "RMIT graduate. I hear very impressive." Elena smiled. "The Green Energy Project. Carlos says you're perfect for it." Elena stood up. "That's why I've instructed HR to fast-track your application, assuming you pass the interview, of course." Carlos protested. "Mom, you can't." "I can and I did," Elena said. "The company needs young talent, and it's time we showed the board that qualifications matter more than last name." Before she left, she turned to Angela. "Next time someone offers you money to go away, tell them to talk to my lawyers. I have a team dedicated to handling harassment suits." After she left, Angela sat down, feeling overwhelmed. "What just happened?" "I think my mother just chose sides," Carlos said with a smile. Mateo's phone buzzed. "It's all over social media. Dar Team Angela is trending." Angela grabbed Mateo's phone. People were sharing their own stories of love across class and race. Pictures of Carlos and Angela's street kiss had been turned into memes about true love conquering all. Carlos smiled. "The public loves a good romance, especially one that makes the rich snobs look bad." "But what about the shareholders?" Angela asked. Mateo was scrolling through his phone. "A lot of small shareholders are posting that they support Carlos. They're saying the company needs modern leadership that understands diversity and inclusion." Carlos's phone rang. "Turn on the business news," Renata said. They turned on the TV and watched the news. "The Rivera-Whitmore merger has always been controversial," the reporter said. "But if it falls through because of this romance, Carlos Rivera might accidentally end up saving his company from a bad deal." Renata's voice came through Carlos's phone. Mom's PR team is amazing. They're painting you as a modern CEO, breaking down old barriers, the kind of leader companies need today. Angela was overwhelmed. This is crazy. Yesterday, I was just a cab driver. Carlos said softly, you were never just anything. Mateo cleared his throat. I should go prepare for my interview tomorrow. Angela grabbed his arm. Are you sure about this? Working for Rivera Industries with all this going on? Mateo smiled. Mom, my whole life you've taught me not to let other people's prejudice stop me. I wasn't lying when I said that. He hugged her. Besides, someone needs to help Carlos drag his company into the modern age. After Mateo went to his room, Carlos pulled Angela close. I know this is all happening fast. Are you okay? Angela looked up at him. Honestly, I'm terrified. I'm not used to being in the spotlight, people judging everything I do. I know, Carlos said, but you're not alone this time. He kissed her forehead. We'll face it together. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Rocio. Reporters are offering money for interviews about you. Told them to get lost. Nobody messes with our Angela. Tears filled Angela's eyes. I never wanted any of this to cause so much trouble. You're not causing trouble. You're causing change, Carlos said, wiping her tears. Remember what you used to tell me in college? That love is the most revolutionary act of all? I remember everything about us, Angela said softly. Carlos smiled, including how you used to fall asleep reading Pride and Prejudice between classes. Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. Different worlds, different classes, and love won in the end. Angela laughed softly. I guess love always finds a way. Carlos touched her cheek. Stay with me, Angela. Let me show you we can win too. Outside, cameras flashed as reporters waited for a picture of the couple. But inside their small apartment, all that mattered was the love between Angela and Carlos. The next morning, Mateo adjusted his tie in the mirror at Rivera Industries. The building was tall and made of glass and steel. Security had to escort him through the reporters outside. Everyone knew who he was now, the son of the woman who had captured Carlos Rivera's heart. Inside the building, Mateo met with the interview panel. They asked him about his thesis, his skills, and ideas for green energy. Finally, the division head said, Very impressive, Mr. Washington. When can you start? Just like that? Mateo asked. The man nodded. Your credentials are exactly what we need. But I should warn you, some people will say you only got this job because of your mother's relationship with Mr. Rivera. Mateo said firmly, Let them talk. My work will speak for itself. Meanwhile, Carlos sat in his office. His secretary rushed in. Sir, your father is here with Mr. Whitmore and Catalina. Before Carlos could respond, they burst into the office. This has gone on long enough, Richard Rivera said. We have a solution to save everyone's reputation. Carlos stood up slowly. I'm not interested in your solutions. Catalina said, The merger goes through as planned, and you and I have a wedding at the plaza. We'll say your involvement with the cab driver was just a brief infatuation. Angela's heart sank. Carlos, no. Carlos stood tall. Get out, all of you, he shouted, and if anyone tries to buy Angela off again, I'll make sure every newspaper knows about it. Later, Carlos called his mom. They're getting desperate, she said. That makes them dangerous. How many shares does Dad still control? Carlos asked. 15%, Elena replied. The Whitmores have 20%. They need 16% more for a majority. Carlos loosened his tie. I can't lose the company, not just for me, but for all our employees. People like Mateo deserve a chance. Then fight for it, Elena said, but do it your way. Meanwhile, Angela met Rocio for lunch. Rocio slid into the booth. You're famous. Look at all these magazines about you. Angela pushed them away. I don't want to read what they're saying about me. A lot of it's good, Rocio said. You're becoming a symbol of true love. The American dream. Angela sighed. Sometimes I miss my simple life, just driving my cab and coming home to Mateo. Rocio patted her hand. Nothing worth having comes easy. The phone rang. It was Carlos. Will you be my date to the charity gala tonight? He asked. Angela's heart raced. I don't have anything to wear for something like that. Carlos said, already taken care of. My mother's sending over options. 2 hours later, Angela stood in her bedroom, surrounded by designer dresses. A stylist and makeup artist worked on her. Mateo stood in the doorway, watching her. You look beautiful, Mom. Angela smiled. I feel like an imposter. You're not, Mateo said. You're exactly where you're meant to be. The gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and as their car stopped, Angela saw lots of photographers ready to take pictures. Carlos held her hand tightly, and even though he didn't like the attention, he said, let's do it anyway. They stepped out of the car, and the flashes from cameras went off. Angela felt Carlos's arm around her to keep her steady as reporters shouted questions at them. Mr. Rivera, is this a serious relationship? One asked. Angela, how does it feel to date a billionaire? Another asked. Carlos guided her through the crowd, with Mateo close behind them. Inside the museum, the grand hall was filled with New York's richest and most important people, all in fancy clothes. Angela could feel their eyes on her and hear whispers about her, but then she saw Gabriela Rivera walking toward them, smiling. Angela, you look stunning in that dress, Gabriela said, giving her a kiss on the cheek. Let me introduce you to some people who are excited to meet the woman who brought my son back to life. For the next hour, Gabriela showed Angela around, and many people were very friendly. Young business owners praised Carlos for shaking up old ways. Sudden and wealthy ladies who remembered Gabriela's humble beginnings treated Angela kindly. But then Catalina Whitmore arrived. She was wearing a dress so expensive, it probably cost more than Angela's whole salary. Well, well, Catalina said loudly, I see the circus is in town. The room went quiet, and Angela could feel everyone's attention on her. Carlos tensed, but Gabriela spoke up. We were just talking about Angela's work with the Literacy Foundation, she said. Did you know she teaches kids who can't read? It's such important work. Catalina's face turned red as some people in the room turned to Angela, now interested in what she was doing. It's nothing special, Angela said humbly. I'm just trying to give back the way others helped me when I was a scholarship student. More people gathered around, asking her about her volunteer work. Catalina walked away, clearly mad that Angela had turned the situation around. Later, as they danced, Carlos pulled Angela close. You're amazing, he whispered, and your mom has been protecting me all night. She says you remind her of herself when she fought her way into this world. Angela looked around the glittering room, feeling like she didn't belong there. I'll never fully belong here, she said quietly. Carlos kissed her softly. That's exactly why I love you. As they swayed to the music, Angela noticed Mateo talking to some young business people, fitting in perfectly. Maybe, she thought, she could fit in too, not by changing who she was, but by staying true to herself. She was strong enough to love across all boundaries, brave enough to stand up against prejudice, and determined to fight for her happy ending. The cameras flashed, catching the moment. Tomorrow, the papers would call them the billionaire and the cab driver dancing at the Met. But right now, in Carlos's arms, Angela felt like the only woman in the world. The next morning, Angela woke up to her phone ringing. It was Carlos, his voice tense. Turn on the news now, he said. Angela turned on the TV. Her heart stopped when she saw the headline. Rivera Industries scandal. Anonymous source claims CEO Carlos Rivera involved in insider trading. She sat down, shocked. Carlos, this isn't true, she said. Of course it's not, he replied. But the timing isn't a coincidence. The meeting is tomorrow, and they're trying to destroy my reputation before the vote. Mateo came out of his room already dressed. What's wrong? He asked, looking at the TV. I shouldn't go in today, Mateo said. Not with all this happening. No, Carlos's voice came through the phone. You go in and do your job. Show them they can't scare us. After hanging up, Angela quickly got dressed. She needed to see Carlos. Outside her building, reporters were already gathering. Miss Washington, did you know about the insider trading? Were you part of the scheme? Is your relationship just a cover-up? They asked. Angela pushed past them, heading for the subway, but a black car pulled up beside her. Get in, Gabriela Rivera called. We're going to the office. In the car, Gabriela looked more serious than Angela had ever seen her. It's worse than they're saying on TV, Gabriela said quietly. Someone messed with the company records to make it look like Carlos has been stealing for years, but it's fake. Our tech team is working on it, but the damage is already done. Stock prices are falling and the shareholders are scared. When they arrived at Rivera Industries, the lobby was a mess. Reporters were everywhere. Security had to clear a path for them, and in the elevator, Gabriela squeezed Angela's hand. He needs you more than ever today, she said. In the conference room, Carlos was sitting with his legal team, looking tired. The timestamps, he was saying when he saw Angela. You shouldn't be here, he said softly. This is going to get ugly. Angela went to him and straightened his crooked tie. I'm exactly where I should be. Now tell me how I can help. Just then, Renata came in. The tech team found something. The records were altered, and they were accessed using Dad's old password. Carlos's face went pale. Dad? He whispered. He wouldn't. Just then, Carlos's father, Richard Rivera, walked in, followed by two detectives. I'm sorry, son, but when I found out what you did, I had to report it, Richard said coldly. You're framing me, Carlos whispered. This isn't true. Richard turned to the detectives. We need you to come with us. Angela grabbed Carlos's arm. You can't arrest him. This is all fake. Ma'am, the detective said kindly, please don't interfere. But before anyone could do anything, Gabriela spoke up. Before anyone goes anywhere, I suggest you look at this. She held up a USB drive with security footage from the server room, showing exactly who accessed the records. Richard's face changed. You're bluffing, he said. Am I? Gabriela smiled coldly. I had cameras installed in the server room years ago after that incident with the Johnson merger. Remember that, Richard, when files mysteriously disappeared? The detectives looked at each other. Plus, Renata added, our tech team confirmed the records were altered. We have the digital fingerprints. Richard Rivera turned to run, but security was already there. Officers, Gabriela said calmly, I believe you're arresting the wrong Mr. Rivera. As Richard was taken away, Carlos sank into a chair. My own father tried to send me to prison. Angela knelt beside him. He failed. You're going to be okay. The shareholder meeting is tomorrow, Carlos said, rubbing his face. Even with Dad arrested, Whitmore might have enough votes. We fight, Gabriela said firmly. I'm calling every shareholder I know. Renata, start reaching out to the media. We need to tell the truth. Mateo came in with his phone. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. He showed her the phone, and social media was going crazy with the hashtag We Can Save Carlos Rivera. Young investors were promising to buy more stock and support Carlos. The people are with you, Mateo said. Now we just need the shareholders to listen. Catalina Whitmore walked into the room. Well, what a mess, she said. But don't worry, our offer still stands. Marry me, Carlos, and all of this goes away. Angela had had enough. She stood up and faced Catalina. You don't get it, do you? She said. Look around. Your whole world is changing. The days of secret deals and arranged marriages are over. Carlos is building something new here, a company that cares more than just money and status. Catalina sneered. How dare you lecture me, you insignificant? She's right, Carlos interrupted. The world is changing, Catalina, and tomorrow at the shareholder meeting, we're going to prove it. After Catalina stormed out, Gabriela turned to Angela. That was quite a speech. I meant every word, Angela said. I know you did, Gabriela smiled. That's exactly why you should be the one to give it again tomorrow in front of the shareholders. Angela's eyes widened. But I'm not. You are the heart of this story, Carlos said softly. The reason I want to change this company. Will you speak for us? Angela looked around the room at Carlos, who had risked everything for love, at Gabriella, who had risen from secretary to society queen, at Mateo, who represented a new generation, and at Renata, who was ready to fight. "Yes," she said. "I'll speak, and they're going to listen." That night, after the lawyers and PR teams had left, Carlos and Angela stood by his office window, looking at the city lights. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know something. Choosing you, choosing love, is the best decision I ever made." Angela leaned against him. "We're going to win tomorrow." "How can you be so sure?" he asked. "Because love is stronger than hate," she said, "and truth is stronger than lies." She smiled up at him. "And our story is stronger than their prejudice." Outside, reporters were still waiting for the next story, but inside that quiet office, Carlos and Angela held each other, drawing strength for the battle ahead. Tomorrow would decide everything, the company's future, their future. But tonight, they had each other. And sometimes, love really is enough. The next morning, Angela stood in front of the mirror, wearing a borrowed suit from Gabriella. Her hands shook as she tried to put on her necklace. "Let me help," Mateo said, coming up behind her. He clasped the necklace. "You're going to be great, Mom." "I'm going to throw up," Angela said nervously. "No, you're not," Mateo said, turning her to face him. "You're Angela Washington. You raised me alone, worked 3 jobs to put me through school, and never let anyone tell you what you couldn't do. Those shareholders are just people, and you're going to make them listen." There was a knock at the door. It was Carlos and Gabriella, both dressed for business. "Ready?" Carlos asked, taking her hand. "No," Angela said, "but let's do it anyway." At the Rivera Industries Conference Center, the room was full of shareholders from all over the world, waiting for the vote. Cameras lined the walls, broadcasting everything live. Eduardo Whitmore was already speaking, painting a sad picture about the company's future. "We need stable, traditional leadership to restore trust," he said. Catalina took the podium next. "Change is dangerous," she declared. "This company was built on family values and doing things the right way. We can't let scandal and lies destroy that legacy." Carlos squeezed Angela's hand as Catalina talked about tradition. When it was their turn, Carlos stood up and said, "I'd like someone to speak on my behalf, someone who represents not just where this company has been, but where it could go." Angela walked up to the podium. The room went quiet. Some older shareholders looked down on her, but younger ones looked at her with hope. She saw Gabriella's encouraging smile, Mateo's proud grin, and Carlos looking at her like she was the only one in the room. "My name is Angela Washington," she began. "Until last week, I was a cab driver. Before that, I worked as a waitress, a cleaning lady, and on night shifts at a convenience store. I did whatever it took to give my son a better life." Angela stood in front of the crowd and looked around the room. "Some of you might think I don't belong here, or that I'm not good enough for your world, for Carlos, or this company," she said. 25 years ago, I thought that too. I let other people's fears and ideas about who I should be make me leave the man I loved. But here's what I've learned since then. Love doesn't care about how much money you have or what your job is. True leadership isn't about keeping things the same. It's about having the courage to change. Success isn't just about making money. It's about making the world better for everyone, not just for the rich. Angela turned to face the older people in the room. "You're scared of change, and I understand that, but look around you. Look at your children and grandchildren. They want a new kind of leader, one who cares about people, not just about money. A leader who sees the good in everyone, even if they don't look or act like you expect. My son Mateo graduated at the top of his class from MIT. Now he's using his smart ideas to help your green energy team. But 25 years ago, people like us didn't have a place in your meetings. We didn't fit your idea of what success looks like." Angela took a deep breath and looked at Carlos. "Carlos Rivera is trying to change that. not just by loving me, but by believing that this company can be more than it is. He believes that making money and helping people can go together. And he believes that diversity or having different kinds of people is the key to growing and making new ideas. Catalina stood up and shouted, "This is crazy. She's not even a shareholder. She doesn't have the right to speak here." Elena, Carlos's mom, smiled and said, "Actually, she is a shareholder now, as of this morning." Everyone turned to look at Elena. "I gave her 1 million shares as a wedding gift," she added. The room went silent. Angela couldn't believe it. Carlos whispered, "Mom, we're not even engaged yet." Elena waved her hand. "Details," she said. Angela took a deep breath and said, "I am a shareholder now. And as a shareholder, I'm asking you all to think about the future, not the past. Choose to be brave and make changes. Choose love instead of fear. Choose to see the good in others, no matter where they come from or what they look like." She looked at Carlos and said, 25 years ago, I left love because I was scared. I was scared of what people would think. I thought I wasn't good enough. I won't make that mistake again, and neither should this company." The room was quiet for a moment, but then someone started clapping. More people joined in, and soon the whole room was clapping. Angela saw tears in the eyes of some of the older women. Even some of the people who used to be against Carlos were nodding their heads. Eduardo Whitmore grabbed the microphone and said, "This is all very nice, but we're here to vote about the future of this company. Feeling emotional won't save it." Carlos stood up and said, "But courage will, vision will, love will." He turned to the room and said, "My father tried to stop me because he was scared of change. The Whitmores want to take over because they're scared of the future, but I'm not scared anymore." He took Angela's hand. "This woman taught me that love is worth fighting for. She taught me that doing the right thing matters more than doing the expected thing, and that true wealth isn't about money. It's about having the courage to follow your heart." Elena stood up and said, "I want to call for the vote." Everyone got their voting devices. The next 5 minutes felt very long to Angela. Finally, the results appeared on the screen. Carlos Rivera, 52%, Whitmore Coalition, 48%. The room went wild again. Catalina stormed out, and her dad followed her. The young people who supported Carlos rushed up to congratulate him, but he only had eyes for Angela. "We did it," he whispered, holding her close. "No," she smiled. "You did it by being brave enough to choose love." Elena appeared beside them, wiping her eyes. "Well done, both of you. Though, I do hope you'll make me look smart about that wedding gift soon." Carlos laughed. "Mom, we've only been back together for a week." Angela smiled and said, 25 years and a week." Carlos looked at her with love in his eyes. "Marry me." "What?" "Marry me. Not because of the company or the shareholders, but just because I love you and I don't want to waste another day without you." Angela looked around the room at all the cameras, at all the people watching, and smiled. It wasn't the most private or romantic proposal, but then nothing about their love story had been normal. The room erupted into cheers. Elena was already on her phone, probably calling wedding planners. Mateo hugged them both, but Carlos and Angela barely noticed. They were lost in each other's eyes, making up for 25 years of lost time with a single kiss. Love had won. Not just in their love story, but in the power of love to change people, companies, and even the world. 6 months later, Angela stood in the bridal suite of the Plaza Hotel, looking at herself in the mirror. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, Elena's gift, though Angela had picked the style herself. "You look beautiful," Rocio said, fixing the veil, "like a real princess." "I don't want to be a princess," Angela said, smoothing her dress. I just want to be me." The door opened and Mateo came in, looking handsome in his tuxedo. "Mom, everyone's waiting." Instead of a huge, fancy wedding, they chose something smaller, just family and close friends, though the press was outside, excited for photos of the love story of the year. How's Carlos? Angela asked nervously. Mateo grinned. He's checked his tie about 50 times. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. Carlos's father admitted to his crimes and was in jail. The Whitmores sold their shares and moved their business overseas. Catalina Whitmore was dating a prince in Monaco now. But things had changed at Rivera Industries. Carlos had led the company to launch big projects in green energy and new technology. Mateo's team was creating amazing new ideas for the environment, and the company's stock was the highest it had ever been. Ready? Rocio asked with a smile. In about 10 minutes, it won't be Miss Washington anymore, Rocio added. Angela looked at herself one last time in the mirror. The woman she saw wasn't just a cab driver anymore, but she wasn't quite a society woman either. She was something new, something all her own. The ceremony was in the grand ballroom. As Angela walked down the aisle with Mateo, she saw all the people who had helped her get here. Elena wiping her eyes, Renata, who was like a sister, and her friends from the cab company looking proud, even if they weren't used to fancy clothes. And there was Carlos waiting for her at the altar, looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. Who gives this woman to be married? The minister asked. Mateo said, I do, with a strong voice. Angela smiled and took her place beside Carlos. He whispered, You're beautiful. You've checked your tie too many times, she whispered back. He laughed softly, and just like that, all her nerves disappeared. The minister talked about love, second chances, and being brave. But Angela didn't hear most of it. She was lost in Carlos's eyes, thinking about how far they'd come, from studying in the library to their secret dates at Bella Luna, from saying goodbye at graduation to that fateful cab ride 25 years later. Give me the rings, the minister said. Mateo stepped forward and handed them the simple gold bands they had picked together. I, Carlos Rivera, take you, Angela Washington, Carlos said, his voice shaking a little as he put the ring on her finger. Angela blinked back tears as she put the ring on his finger. By the power vested in me, the minister said, I now pronounce you husband and wife. They kissed, and the room cheered. At the reception, Elena raised her glass. When Carlos first brought Angela home in college, I knew she was special. It took 25 years, but my son finally figured out what I knew then, that true love is worth fighting for. She raised her glass to Carlos and Angela. May their courage inspire others to follow their hearts. Later, as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Carlos held Angela close. Happy? He asked. Perfect. She smiled. She looked around the room. I still can't believe all this is real sometimes. What part? He asked. The fancy wedding? The society life? She replied. No. She touched his face. The fact that we got our second chance, that love won. Across the room, Mateo was dancing with a young woman from his team. Elena was talking with Rocio, probably planning some charity event. Two worlds that were once very different now beautifully joined. You know what this means? Carlos said suddenly. What? Angela asked. You can't drive a cab anymore. You're the wife of a CEO, Angela smiled. Actually, I'm keeping my cab license. Maybe not to drive full-time, but it reminds me of who I am, where I came from. Carlos kissed her finger. I love who you are. I love every part of your story. Our story, she corrected. Photographers captured the moment. Tomorrow, their picture would be in the paper again. The billionaire and the cab driver living their fairy tale. But Angela knew the real story wasn't in the photos. The real story was how Carlos held her like she was precious. It was about the pride in his eyes as he watched them dance. It was about the tears of joy in Elena's eyes. The real story was about love that doesn't care about class or color or time. It was about second chances and happily ever afters for those who are brave enough to fight for them. Later that night, on their way to the airport for their honeymoon, Angela leaned against Carlos's shoulder. 25 years, she said. Was it worth the wait? He kissed her softly. Every second. Let's not wait that long for anything else, she laughed. The city lights twinkled outside, shining just for them, celebrating a love that had finally found its way home. I love you, Mrs. Rivera, Carlos whispered. Angela smiled. The name was new, but the feeling, the deep, unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, had been 25 years in the making. I love you too, she said. Always have. Always will. As their car drove into the night, Angela knew that while their fairy tale wedding was ending, their real story, the story of two hearts beating as one, of love conquering all obstacles, was just beginning. Some people said it was like a movie, the billionaire falling in love with the cab driver. But Angela knew it was better than any movie. It was real, messy, complicated, beautiful, and real, just like love itself. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Check out our other videos too. See you in the next one.